Hi, welcome everyone. This is Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We are powered by Software Leadership. Software Leadership is a cohort-based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Mindy Galati, and I'm here with my co-host Lindsay Goldford-Gray. We are the co-founders of Safra. Together, we bring a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I got an opportunity to listen to Lindsay chat about imposter syndrome to a group of about 100 lawyers a couple weeks ago. And I think it's a really timely, interesting topic, something that most people have encountered either in themselves or with others. And so let's dive in and talk about an imposter phenomenon. Lindsay, tell us what it is.
Yeah, so as Mindy mentioned, I spoke on this topic a couple of weeks ago, and it's near and dear to my heart because unfortunately, probably like many of us, I've experienced it a lot. So the research defines imposter phenomenon as a behavioral health phenomenon described as self-doubt of intellect, skills, or accomplishments among high-achieving individuals. These individuals cannot internalize their success and subsequently experience pervasive feelings of self-doubt, anxiety, depression, and/or apprehension of being exposed as a fraud in their work despite verifiable and objective evidence of their successfulness. So, evidence of success, but it doesn't quite register. And so we're all afraid of being exposed as frauds. Have you ever experienced the imposter phenomenon, Mindy?
I mean, a little bit. I think I'm an unusual case where I don't find myself experiencing it a lot, but I see people experience it all the time. And I'm always taken aback because I'm like, you're so qualified, like you're so smart, like you're here for a reason. But I see it's pretty prevalent. And what I think is interesting is that often the higher somebody goes in an organization, the more they experience it. Maybe that's not surprising, but I always would think like, well, you must feel confident that you're here in this space. But a lot of times as people move up in an organization, they continue to feel more and more of it. And I want to just mention some of the research because it's important framing. We hear this phrase used a lot, imposter syndrome. And the first study was published in 1978, and it studied high achieving women. And it expressly used the term imposter phenomenon. I personally don't like imposter syndrome. I think that it sounds like a disease. It sounds like an illness. And it's, I have a lot of conflict with that term. Imposter phenomenon makes a little more sense to me. And so, Lindsay, you were the first one to sort of raise this to me as there is this research about that. And I like that because I think it is prevalent. I think it happens a lot, but I don't think it's like an illness. I think it's, and we'll talk about sort of the root of why this happens in a minute, but I don't want this to be people's Achilles heel. I see it too often with women that I deal with, that I coach. And, I'm what you would call like a girl's girl. Like I am all for rooting for women all the time. And so I really hope we can talk about this more to get to dispel some of the myths and help people move on. Are there any other research findings that you found, Lindsay, that have been helpful?
Yeah, so that first study is from 1978. So apparently this has been happening for a while. Mm-hmm. There was, another, I don't know if, some of you have heard this whole like, oh, men apply for jobs when they meet like 3 of the qualifications and women wait until they have like 9. And people kind of say that and they like throw it out there, but nobody really knows where it comes from. Well, it comes from an internal report done by Hewlett Packard, HP, like they make printers and ink and other things. They did a study and found that men do apply for opportunities when they meet 60% of the qualifications roughly, and women wait until they meet about 100. And then this internal study was cited in a Harvard Business Review article that was published in 2014. So that sort of like research bit that we throw around that, nobody knows where it came from. It came from there. So it is real. It's also cited in Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In from 2013, which I'm less excited about for a number of reasons. But those are sort of, there's been many other studies done on the imposter phenomenon, but I think those are the big two that we want to highlight as the very first one, and then this HP finding that was also noted in Harvard Business Review.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that conversation on qualifications, because, you know, I have 10 years of anecdotal research on my own that women don't apply for things. I talked to a woman recently who got voted onto the board of a company. It's not an easy feat to get approved on the board. And she came to me for coaching because her first board meeting is this week. And she was like, should I be there? Do I really know enough? And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, and she's like, I don't have X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, you had A, B, and C because you got voted on. So like, who cares if you didn't have the end of the story? You have the beginning, you have the A, B, C, D, and you don't learn X, Y, Z until you are on a board. Like, how do you know what it's to be on a board until you've been on a board? And obviously you had the credentials to be voted onto that board. And so it's like, it comes up all of the time, this qualifications issue, and it definitely is tied to this imposter phenomenon.
Yeah, and one other thing to note about that HP article, that there was a little bit more digging, and they found that women, the primary reason, the most common reason that women did not apply for a job is because they felt like they weren't qualified, and so they essentially didn't want to spend the time, whereas men viewed the list of qualifications as like suggestions, whereas, you know, something to be negotiated, whereas women viewed them as requirements. And so there's part of this, you know, clearly there's an imposter phenomenon, sort of like, you know, light going off, but also like women don't approach things. And I think this is based on like, you know, some bias and things that we're going to get into in a moment, but really thinking through like, oh, I'm not going to apply for that because I don't have 10 out of 10. And they say these are requirements. And so I'm going to view them as requirements, as opposed to like, well, I have 8 or I have 7. And the rest are like things that like I can figure out, I can learn along the way. And also this concept of just because I have not done a specific task means that I don't have the skill set to do the specific task. And that's just like a false narrative, right? Just because we haven't done something does not mean that we don't possess the tools and skills to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's great, like interviewing advice. We're going a bit off, but I do think it's great to say, like, if you don't have all the qualifications, you should show that you can learn. I mean, obviously you're where you are because you can learn, and all of us are learning. We're learning until the end of our careers. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of imposter phenomenon, you know, there's things that feed it. And so let's talk about those. Mindy, what is something that sort of like feeds the imposter phenomenon?
Yeah. So I will say in the broadest sense, bias. And so I look at bias as implicit and sort of cognitive, or implicit cognitive bias, and then explicit bias. And so there is definitely still today explicit bias against certain groups of people that tell them they shouldn't be in the room. Like, why are you here? Women don't deserve to be here. Women are not smart enough. People of color, right? There's still, I think, pretty explicit racism, sexism, homophobia, ageism, by the way. Ageism is a big one, that fuels the fire of someone to feel like they don't belong. Yeah. When I was a brand new lawyer, there was a judge that I appeared in front of who explicitly would say, right, and he was a judge that I had to do jury trials in front of, that women should not be lawyers in front of everyone. Oh. So he believed that, he said it. And so imagine being like a brand new lawyer.
A lawyer in his courtroom.
About to do a jury trial that's consequential. And he's like, women shouldn't be lawyers. Like, y'all should not be lawyers. So there is, and so do you know, for me, I'm like, yeah, right. Like, leave me alone. But sometimes we internalize that. So when Lindsay and I first talked about imposter syndrome year ago, I said, I don't like this because it's really internalized bias, and it may be internalized bias from explicit sources or implicit. But yeah, so those explicit biases exist, but then there's implicit, right, which are these cognitive, you know, implicit bias is one of your 180 cognitive biases. And you hear these micro messages over the course of your life. And it's not just things you hear, it's things that you observe. So if in every movie the CEO is always a man, or in real life, the CEO is always a man. I think there's like more CEOs named John than there are women CEOs. Like
Oh my
of all
gosh.
CEOs, of
That's
all Fortune
wild.
500, there's more that are named John than women. So those are just like little micro messages that say, well, maybe I can't be the CEO. Maybe I can't be the managing partner of a firm. And so those biases fill our brains with all of these messages. And then each one of us interprets those messages differently based upon our upbringing, based upon all these circumstances. And I think that is a very big root cause of imposter phenomenon, is bias coming at you from all different ways, and then how you navigate it. And some people are just like, I don't care that you don't think I should be here, I'm here. And then there's some people who say, oh, should I be here? Like, is this okay? And that's very specific to who you are. What are some other ones, Lindsay?
Yeah, I mean, some other ones are examples like uncertainty. So obviously, if we don't know something, that makes us feel like, oh, should I know this? I mean, I see that a lot. I'm in the immigration legal landscape, and stuff is changing all the time. And so I see a lot of like, oh, I feel bad or ashamed if I get a question based on a policy that dropped 30 seconds ago and I don't know the answer, right? So that certainly can feed it. Unrealistic standards and comparisons. So that's like, when we're supposed to be perfect at everything, or when all that we see online on social media is people being perfect. And so we're comparing and we're trying to live up to those impossible standards. And then exclusionary and unsafe work environments. And so that's like, if you're juggling a small child at home, or a sick parent, or something like that, and it's unsafe for you to talk about what's happening in your personal life and how it's affecting your work, that can give feelings of like, oh, I should be doing these 20 things and I can't do them, and essentially then creating this sort of unrealistic environment, and feels like, oh, I should be able to, but I literally can't.
Yeah. You know what I want to say here too, something that's come up in a couple coaching sessions I've had recently is when you're thinking about your career and you're thinking about like, should I go after this job, or am I qualified, or should I be at this table? I do think that it's really important to understand your familiar upbringing, like your family upbringing, your culture, because when I'm sometimes in these coaching conversations, I will get to that root of like, and it's really related to your family. And I'm not a therapist. So like, there's certain things we can talk about in coaching. And then there's certain things that I say, hey, this is probably something you want to untangle and process with the therapist. But I do think it's important, if you're having imposter phenomenon, to go back and think about the micro messages that were told to you as a child. Like, what was said by your closest family members about careers, about success, about achievement. And I think it will help you figure this out. It's kind of painful, I think, for a lot of people, but it's so important. So I just want to quickly mention that.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off that real quick, the 1978 study was done by therapists, clinicians. And one of the things they said was they hypothesized that, and remember, they only studied high achieving women. So it was totally focused on women. And they said that they tend to sort of hypothesize that women that experienced high rates of imposter phenomenon fell into one of two groups. And they were both based on childhood messaging. And one was that they lived in a household with a sibling who was essentially designated explicitly or implicitly the smart one. And so they spent their whole childhood trying to like prove that they were smart, right? And then the other one was women who grew up in households where they were told that they were brilliant and they could do anything, and that anything they did would come easy to them because they were so smart. And then they got to living life and they were like, oh, this is hard. And then, then it's like, oh, is there something wrong with me that I couldn't do all of this super easily? And, I'm not as smart as I thought I was, or that everybody thought I was. And so that's really interesting. And I think that I think it's all expanded as we're talking about, but the original study, those were the reasons. The familial upbringing was huge.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk now about sort of manifestations of the imposter phenomenon and when we experience imposterism. I'm going to name a bunch, and then Mindy, I want to ask you if you have one or two that jump out at you. So common manifestations of imposter phenomenon are depression, anxiety, perfectionism, attribution of success to temporary or external factors, fear of being exposed as a fraud, lower risk tolerance, over preparation, procrastination, fear of failure, and a fixed mindset. So we could probably talk about all of these things in quite a bit of detail, but we don't have the time. So Mindy, what's one of them that jumps out at you?
Yeah, so I think that I'm going to do over preparation very quickly and then go into anxiety. So over preparation, obviously, if you don't think you belong, if you don't think you're smart enough, you're going to over prepare. You're going to dot every I and cross every T. The problem is that burns you out. And so like that manifests in like, I'm so tired. How do I ever achieve this? So be careful of that. But anxiety is interesting because I don't think people often equate like imposter phenomenon with like, oh, I'm feeling anxious or I have depression, but it does cause a lot. Anxiety comes out in that you are constantly sort of planning the worst case scenario. I'm going to be found out, or I am, or the worst thing is that like, I won't get this job. I will fail on a project. And failure is so important. And so anxiety often keeps us away from doing things that we could fail at. And then it almost is a self-fulfilling prophecy is like, well, see, I told you I'm too nervous to do this. So I shouldn't be in this role. Because a lot of times when you're at higher levels in an organization, you are amongst risk takers. You are amongst people who don't deal with sort of that anxious fear of the future. So I think anxiety is super interesting as that's one of the manifestations, because you got to go back and say, is this anxiety or is this me feeling like I shouldn't be here? Like I'm not the person for the job. What about you, Lindsay? Which one sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, the two that I focused on during my talk that I'll touch on here are perfectionism. So it's similar to over preparation in that if we white knuckle it and we're perfect at everything, like no one will say we're not good enough. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we touched on this. Sharice Robison is it's our most recent podcast guest, and she's the chief financial officer. She was for Girl Scouts and now she's at the Texas Tribune. And she was talking about that in her role, and CFO, I mean, very, very male dominated in a nonprofit space, which is highly female dominated. And so she's navigating like, I have to be super warm and friendly and like explain things, financial things, technical things in a way that are that's palatable, but also like be over competent, on the like expertise, expertise side. And she basically was like, I just want to be above reproach, like perfect. And we see that constantly where we say like, well, if I execute flawlessly, then nobody's going to criticize me or no one's going to say that I can't be here. That feeds into lower risk tolerance, because if we aren't sure that we're going to achieve something, we oftentimes don't do it because we're afraid to fail and we're afraid that someone's going to call us out. And, for me, one of the big ways that I realized that I was experiencing this is when I was preparing for a half Ironman triathlon, which is a very long, it's a 1.2 mile swim with a 56 mile bike and a 13.1 mile run. So it's a long day. And I had experienced a calf injury, like a pretty minor calf injury, but it was like a couple months before the race. And I didn't register. I put off registering. And then once I got better, I still put off registering. Like I wouldn't register. And my husband would be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Training for months. And it really got to me. I finally realized, I was like, oh, I'm just really afraid I'm going to fail. Like, I really just don't know that I can do this. And so I'm scared to try. And I think we do that a lot. And that kind of goes back to like why women don't apply for things, is they're like, well, I don't think I can do it. And so I'm just not going to try.
So what can we do about this from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, sort of three buckets, right? So like organizations have things that they can do to create psychologically safe environments and things like that. But then let's focus today on sort of like what we can do internally as individuals, and then also what we can do collectively in the community. So, Indy, do you have kind of like one thing that you think is helpful for us to keep in mind as we're trying to dismantle imposter phenomenon?
Yeah, I think normalizing failure and dreaming big. And I do this because I'm an entrepreneur and I have like all these big things. And I think it's okay to like tell others what your big dreams are, and without being worried that you may not reach them, right? But it doesn't mean that you hide that. And then I also think that when people know that you've tried and you failed, you missed your shot, you didn't do exactly what you want, you're modeling for them that it's okay. And I think that is so healthy in this world where image is everything and your social media is polished, to be messy and to show people like what that is. And the one thing I'll say, that the way that the whole perfectionism is linked here is that if you're in a workplace and you're always perfect, people do not see you as authentic, because so don't put in that extra work, because people don't like, because they're like, oh, this person is perfect, I can't associate with them, or I can't relate to them, right? Normalizing failure is important for lots of reasons. It's healthy for you, but it's healthy for everybody around you. And it's not, and you know, there are environments and companies where like there are big shots taken and there's big losses. And I think for me, like this is a learned behavior, because I am a perfectionist and I don't want to be seen as a failure. But as an entrepreneur, and I took on like a hard job, both Lindsay and I were public defenders. Like that's a hard job where you lose a lot and you get your butt kicked and you get yelled at. And I think that was so healthy for me to like go into an environment where I could not be perfect. I could not. There's no chance could I be perfect. And now in sort of like 20 years as a lawyer, and now, you know, building businesses and that, it's like, yeah, things don't always work out, but I'm not embarrassed about it. I'm just like, lesson learned, let's move on to the next
That
thing.
was a great, okay.
Didn't like that. Let's not repeat that mistake, but I learned from it.
Yes, absolutely. And then I think the other one is, you know, we want to normalize failure, but we also want to normalize like shouting out our own and others' successes, so that we remind ourselves that like we should be here and we are in the room, even, you know, and we deserve to be in the room, even if we shot and missed, or, you know, things didn't go as planned. And so one of the things that I suggested at the Well Summit that I'll suggest here is to keep essentially an evidence log of your own successes. And I called it a hype file. And I encouraged people to set a 15-minute reminder on their calendar, recurring calendar invite, just to spend 15 minutes sort of like thinking about what successes and victories they've had that week and writing them down. And it's just kind of this reminder that's like, oh yeah, I am good at what I do. And like everything may not be perfect, but you know, I'm continuously having successes. And bonus points if you know, add an extra 5 minutes or an extra 2 minutes to text a friend and be like, don't forget to add XYZ to your hype file, you know, so that we all are being reminded, both by ourselves and others, that we do deserve to be at the table.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, go ahead.
Decided earlier that we're going to have 3 more episodes before we break for the summer. So I'll see you back next week.
Bye, everyone. Take care.